Tone it down, Grandma.
Eavesdroppin.
Hoo-ha, Michelle. Hoo-ha to you-ha. Hoo-ha, hi. What?
More nonsense.
Oh my God, it started already. Nonsense from the top.
Yes, tip from the top. That's what we've got.
Huh? I thought you were having some sort of breathing malfunction there, Michelle. Are you okay?
I'm okay. I've got a bit of a blocked nose. Apologies.
Apologies to all the listeners, the lovely eavesdroppers out there.
Apple bogies.
Welcome. I think we need to do the welcome because it's gone off on a tangent.
It has gone off tangent. Off-piste.
Off-piste. Hello, I'm Geordie.
And I'm Michelle, and you are listening to Eavesdroppin, the comedy podcast.
The Pomedy Codcast.
That is us.
You're welcome to listen to our conversation. We're allowing it.
Please do.
Oh, we love it.
We encourage it. We've had some people
listening.
It's funny, Geordie, you never know who's listening out there.
We're not just shouting down into a cave, Michelle. There are listeners out there. Not just our regular ones either, like our lovely Charlene Happy Chappy, who did agree that, yes, we do have some lovely chats. And yes, we can use pictures of her cat on Patreon and her mum, Magzo.
Oh, Magzo. I will say, I think it was Charlene that gave a like on the Patreon to Jen's pussy.
Yes. Jen being your mother, by the way, for those who don't know.
And Bella being Mum's cat.
The pussy that you're constantly brushing, giving it a good hard brush.
Combing.
Okay.
There's all sorts over on the Patreon.
There is.
If you haven't listened to this month's extra droppings, shout out again.
Pinball Jeff Harvey, a.k.a. Pinball Jeff. He's a fascinating guy. He's involved in so many things. I met up with him in King's Cross for a coffee, and we've got the conversation over on patreon.com/eavesdroppin. No G.
Picture review on the tube with Pinball Jeff. Do you know what? Jeff will love this. When I was putting the links together, I found some footage of him from 1984. It's on the Patreon.
Really?
Yes, have a look.
What was he doing in 1984, Michelle?
Talking about pinballs.
Oh. Now, what Jeff didn't tell me until the end of our conversation, because I knew that Jeff was involved in the pinball arcades on Glastonbury-on-Sea, which is set up by the Mutoid Waste Company, which is this amazing collective of people that I've been aware of since I first arrived in London over 35 years ago. They're the original recyclers.
They're the original Wombles.
I don't know if they would agree with that terminology, but they do Carhenge over at Glastonbury every year. They set up some amazing things, all very industrial, reusey, kind of Mad Maxy kind of landscapes that they're famous for doing, and robotics and things like that. And Jeff's involved with those guys. He's involved with Dreamland Margate, where he's got his pinball museum. He's in a band with some of those Mutoid Waste Company people called Ruby Throat.
The original Ruby Throat. There's another one. I've put a link on the... Yes, someone...
You know it all.
Tried to rip them off. So they're called the original Ruby Throat.
Oh, far out. And the Bikini Beach Band, he's in that as well. And he's a host, a regular contributor on the very popular BBC TV show, The Repair Shop. So he's a bloody celebrity. He didn't tell me that till after we'd finished our conversation.
Yes. Well, I did put a link to one of his episodes of The Repair Shops.
I'll be watching that.
Actually, he's talking about a pinball machine from back in the day on Brighton Pier that somebody needed repairing.
Oh, that's interesting. I love a penny, Michelle. I used to be very good at the pinballs.
Do you know what? My best friend as a child, her father collected old pinball machines. He had an entire house full of this stuff.
Wow. That sounds like Jeff's bedroom.
Well, he worked at the Australian National Archives, and he had the most incredible collection of just stuff. It was like stepping back in time and walking through a portal into another world.
Wow.
His master's voice, things from the 1920s and all sorts. When I look back, I don't think I realised how special it was, but as a kid, it was endless curiosities. It was wonderful.
All the fun. Amazing. That's all over there on the Patreon page. If you're a member, great, you can access because you're paying for it. Well done. Thank you. That helps keep me and Michelle, well, it gives us a reason to live, for God's sake, doesn't it, really?
Yes, and if you're not a patron, why bloody not?
Go over, check it out. There's some free stuff on there, but if you want access to the real good stuff, in fact, I might even put a little bit of Jeff on this episode, Michelle, just to say, how about a little excerpt from Jeff, just so you can hear some of the interesting things he's got to say.
What had happened that had really got it to this point where I was really scared was that the night before, I had this little drinking mug, which had been a christening present or pewter christening mug. Anyway, I was filling it with water. I always drank it every night. And there's suddenly this, I could feel the room went cold. I thought, here we go. And there's this massive explosion. Now, I heard this incredible noise, but I also, the fact that no one had woken up, I thought, I've heard it. Did it exist?
Hang on. Were you awake or asleep when this happened?
I was standing up. I was awake. I wasn't even in my pajamas. I was awake, doing stuff in my room, heard this kapow, looked round and knew that somehow that noise had only existed in whatever reality happened to be in. Anyway, turned round, completely, as the only time it's ever happened to me, turned round, nothing there, came back, the mug of water was gone.
No, it disappeared.
And it was literally been right by my hand. Couldn't find it anywhere. Anyway, at this point, I got a bit freaked out. Next day, went with a friend of mine to the Catholic priest, gave me this crucifix. When I walked into my room with this crucifix the next day, I could see for the first time it went really cold again straight away. And this time little lines of light, like a spider's web, went like that, all over the room. And the next thing, there's a little ball about the size of a tennis ball, no bigger than that moved around everywhere.
Get out of here, Jeff.
Absolutely, no, I promise you. Right. Absolutely right. I didn't know what to expect. I was completely freaked out by this. I was on my own.
Yeah.
Just saw this thing. And then it gradually, over the next 2 months, faded away completely.
Hang on. Do you mean that the ball faded away or the energy?
The energy. Right, when I came in, all these lines, there's this little ball that flitted around the room and then sat it somewhere. I didn't go to my room for that 2 days.
Of course you didn't.
And then when I did, it went a bit cold, but not as much. And I felt much happier. And I felt this is going to change now. And over 2 to 3 months, it completely faded.
Okay. Did anybody else in your family experience any of this energy?
What was very interesting, my brother was much more cynical. My parents didn't say you're barking mad. They thought I was a bit peculiar anyway, so it didn't surprise them. But one of the most fascinating things was my 2 uncles. One was a Queen, barrister, who was a parliamentary judge, and the other was a barrister as well. And when I spoke to them about it, I think they'd be saying that it's so utterly ridiculous. They said, "Oh yeah, both of us, it runs in the family, Jeffrey. Both of us are poltergeists. Used to make," and one of them said, "Oh, it made my homework disappear. I'd have to do this weird ritual to get my homework back." I said, and I was so gobsmacked, I thought they'd be the least likely people in the world to believe it.
Okay, so going back to our lovely listeners, we had one of our faves, Safka, who writes in all the time for telly recommendations. And I've got an amazing recommendation for you right now, actually, of something that I watched this week, Michelle.
Okay, I'm all ears.
And I smashed it out. Me and the family smashed it out in basically 2 nights. It's a new kind of concept that seems to be worldwide. I've only seen the British one, but I reckon it's the best. It's called Last One Laughing, aka LOL, and it's over on Prime or Amazon or whatever you like to call it. It's hosted by Jimmy Carr, and Roisin Connerty is also in it with him. And you've got all these comedians in a room for, I think, about 6 hours, because it's 6 episodes, and they're not allowed to laugh. When you laugh, you get a yellow card. If you do it twice, you're out, and you get to sit with Jimmy and Roisin and watch the action, and it's bloody hilarious. You've got comedy legends, Bob Mortimer, Richard Ayoade, Sarah Pascoe. You've got Daisy May Cooper, who's hilarious. We've got Rob Beckett with massive teeth. He said his problem was even just looking like he's not smiling, which is his resting face. Joe Lycett, who's a very famous comedian here in the UK. Harriet Kemsley, someone I was never familiar with before, but she's great. And Lou Sanders, which is another female comedian here in the UK that people love. And of course, Joe Wilkinson, who must be one of my new faves, actually. He was the postman in Ricky Gervais's Afterlife.
Oh, yes. Okay, that guy.
Classic. But of course, everybody loves Bob Mortimer. He is now considered a statesman of British comedy, and so he should be. And talking about famous, do you remember famous spots, Michelle? We talked about celebrity things. I'd forgotten this, but back in the day, early days of living in Camberwell for me in the 90s, Bob Mortimer also lived in Camberwell, and we would often frequent the same late night bars after our favourite pub, the Hermit's Cave, would shut its doors of an evening. We'd go to the Mexican restaurant, and often a grumpy Bob would be at the same table with his pals as me and my shouty friends. So that's a bit of a thing. thing to remember.
Yes.
Sorry, I've been rambling on. That's a top pick for you guys to watch on TV. But then I've got this. On the back of our Jejune Institute episode, Safka wrote in. And she wrote in something about documentaries. Because if you remember, the Jejune Institute, there was a documentary made by a guy called Spencer McCall. And the Institute documentary was about this long-running game in San Francisco, which was either an art hoax, which for me means it was all made up just for the documentary's sake and wasn't really a game at all, or it was a game that did actually go on for about 2 years and people got so into it that they got lost in it and got really obsessed by it.
I will say, just for anyone who had done their research,
I got the dates wrong.
Yeah, it was in the 2000s, 2008,
yeah, not
2018.
I got that wrong. But here's something that Safka sent over from Reddit. The username was deleted, and because she loves a documentary hour, Safka, but she found this interesting. The person on Reddit said, "I'll never forget my 2001 freshman 8mm film class when we had a documentary filmmaker come in to show us his documentary on American Indigenous high school basketball players and asked if we believed documentaries. At the time, we all did." Because if you remember, Michelle, you said, they should have a little caveat saying the following documentary is based on true. But actually, all documentaries are supposedly true life.
By the definition of what a documentary is, however, everything is so meta now. You can't trust anything.
This person on Reddit says, at the time we did believe documentaries, but then this documentary filmmaker went on to say that the fight scene in the parking lot in his documentary was edited in to look like it happened at this racist school, when in fact they were two different incidents. The writer goes on to say, though it seems today that audiences know that everything can be faked, they don't seem to realise in the moment that it is. Even for me, with my film background, I forget the documentary I'm watching can be misleading, manipulative, or even completely false.
Mm-hmm.
Decades later, after that class, as I binge the new Tiger King documentary, it makes me wonder where the lines of truth and sensation are. Does a documentary have to be truthful at all? How would we even know unless we were there? So that brings me to another writer-inner after that episode.
Good point.
It's actually the documentary director of the Institute, Spencer McCall. He got in touch, as you know, Michelle.
I know. I saw it on the bloody emails and I was like, what the fuck? Hell! Spence, he called himself. He got friendly straight away.
Spence. So he wrote in and he said, and I hope you don't mind, Spencer, that we're reading out your email. He said, well done, very thorough and accurate. Despite the fact I got the dates wrong, Spencer, you didn't notice that. Loved listening. It goes way deeper should you ever want to chat. Best wishes, Spencer. So that got Michelle and I a little bit excited. What do you mean it goes deeper? So I got in touch with Spencer and I said, are you Spencer McCall, the director responsible for the Institute and Dispatches from Elsewhere with Jason Segel? And he responded to say yes. And yes, he would like to talk to us. So stay tuned, listeners, because there's going to be a chat with Spencer McCall coming up.
Well, hopefully he agrees and he doesn't just vanish into the ether.
Michelle still thinks he's going to be tricking us.
Oh, he's going to be pranking us. He's totally going to be pranking us. He's going to tell us, he's going to feed us a line of BS, bullshit. And the thing is, we're going to not know. I honestly feel like his response, he said, it's true and it all went deeper than you thought. Well, what's true? The fact that it's an art hoax? That's true? Which part is true, Spence?
Well, these are the questions that we need to ask Spencer when we meet him.
So stay tuned for that. Lots of fun coming up. Spence does not know what he's in for.
Awkward. Orcs.
We love it when you write in. Do write in.
Keep writing. Keep listening.
Eavesdroppin.
If you can.
Have you got any more telerecs? Because I have been watching 3 things because I'm a little bit desperate. I just need something at the end of a hard night. I don't want anything too challenging. So I've been watching The Apprentice.
Oh.
What a bunch of dickheads.
I would never watch that.
Oh, I love it. It's just so bad. It is my reality TV guilty pleasure. Hot sauce. They had to make a hot sauce.
Oh, yeah.
What would you call your hot sauce if you had to call a hot sauce a hot sauce?
Well, there's a lot of hot sauces out there.
Yes.
It would depend on the chili.
Ingredients.
Yeah.
Yes.
And whether or not it's an Asian hot sauce or a South American hot sauce or an Indian hot sauce. So I would look to the origin, of it and try and get a name from there.
So they did an Indian hot sauce and they called it Umami Mummy.
No.
They didn't even know what umami was.
Fuck off.
It was the biggest joke. And they did another one with some super hot chili.
They did not put thought into that.
Called Carolina something.
Huh?
The chili was called Carolina Bonnet or I don't know, something. And it's meant to be the hottest chili in the world. Well, it was so hot they couldn't even eat it because they have to actually create the hot sauce and market it. I just thought, Geordie, we should go on there for no other reason than we're just not fucking dickheads.
Absolutely.
So you never know. That could be our next foray.
Well, sometimes you just need to show them how to do it right, don't you, Michelle?
And then Swedish programs, because Andreas is obsessed. We were watching The Playlist, which is all about how Spotify got founded.
Oh, that sounds interesting. That's Swedish?
Yeah.
What, Spotify itself?
Spotify is Swedish. So is Acast.
Go Sweden.
They have all the good shit. Sweden tech is some of the best in the world. So it's very interesting. I would recommend it if you fancy an easy watch. And then rediscovered, because I was watching this on the plane and then totally forgot about it, Better Call Saul. Now, it's an oldie, but fuck man, it's good.
Okay.
Just an old school rec right there.
Thank you, Michelle.
From me to you.
Thank you. I will receive. Thank you for giving, I shall receive. So, Michelle, going back to Pinball Jeff and his supernatural experiences, of which he's had many from a young age as well, I got into the haunting spirit and I watched Danny Robbins' latest series, Uncanny, on the BBC. And one of the episodes, and they were bloody scary too, Michelle, the Shadow Men episode, I do not recommend watching that before bed. It was a hard watch. But it mentioned something in the final episode that they kind of mentioned in passing. They also mentioned the last haunting episode that we did that I talked about, the Yorkshire house. I can't remember what it was called now, but they mentioned that. And they mentioned another one that I'd never heard of before. So I went looking and I found something called Hauntings, which is a BBC series from 2022 that uses reconstruction and personal testimony to examine the most intriguing, terrifying, and enduring paranormal cases in the UK and the US. So they've done the Enfield poltergeist, which we've also talked about, the Conjuring House of Rhode Island, never heard of it.
No, never.
The Lady of the Lake from Georgia, USA, never heard of that.
No.
That sounds very intriguing.
I mean, Lady of the Lake
Please tell me more.
Quite generic, but I've not heard of it from that area.
Sounds amazing. And the Edinburgh Executioner, which is what I'm taking a peek at in this week's episode.
Oh, that sounds horrible.
Thank you. So to tell you about the Edinburgh Executioner, Michelle, I'm going to have to go back and explain to you that Sir George Mackenzie was Edinburgh's famous executioner who was buried in Greyfriars kirkyard, which is a cemetery in Edinburgh. And in 1998, his grave was disturbed. But before I tell you more, let's get to know Sir George. Sounds great, doesn't he, the executioner?
It sounds fucking terrifying.
Well, Sir George Mackenzie was actually a Scottish lawyer and a key player in some of the darkest chapters of Scotland's history. He was born in Dundee in 1636 and he rose through the ranks to become Lord Advocate, whatever that is. But it's a powerful, I guess, legal figure and a staunch enforcer of that king's rule, which was King Charles II. So he was enforcing all the laws. And I don't know a lot about King Charles II. I get confused.
With a sword. Off with your head.
Right, okay. You know about King Charles II, do you?
No, I don't.
You sound like you do.
It just sounds terrible. I said it so confidently, but no.
Yeah, him with his sword. So Mackenzie made his mark in the Faculty of Advocates in 1659 and later served as Justice Depute, where he played a significant role in Scotland's infamous witch trials.
Uh-huh.
A good time was had by none in those days. Like you can imagine, being a woman in those days would have been fucking awful. But don't forget, it wasn't just women who were accused of witchcraft. Even goats and animals were accused of Yes. It was insane.
It was because someone was hungry and they're like, that goat's possessed. Oh, dinner.
Just anything odd. God forbid that any of us were thrown back into those days all with our neurodivergent ways. We'd all be drowned and sunk and burned and whatnot. But it was George's ruthless persecution of the Presbyterian Covenanters, who were people who defied the king by demanding a free Church of Scotland, that earned him his notorious nickname, Bloody Mackenzie.
Bloody hell.
Bloody Mackenzie. After the Battle of Bothwell Bridge in 1679, Mackenzie oversaw the brutal imprisonment of 1,200 captured Covenanters in a field beside Edinburgh's Greyfriars kirkyard, which is where he ended up getting buried by some cruel twist of fate.
Did you say kirkyard?
I did say kirkyard, and I said it before as well.
But what is that?
I guess it's Scottish for churchyard.
Oh, okay.
It's called
All right.
kirkyard. It's a cemetery. Some were executed while hundreds died from starvation, disease and maltreatment. His legacy of cruelty left a permanent mark on Scottish history. So he was famous for being a cunt, basically. Excuse the C word. A fierce advocate of the use of torture, this guy was. So Mackenzie was later, like I said, himself buried in 1861 in that very same Greyfriars kirkyard where he had the bodies of the Covenanters thrown into a mass grave. So there's all that history buried in one central location.
Imagine that dude being your husband. No thanks.
Although, is it better to be closer to the horror? Keep your enemies close.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that he's like nice to the wife and a cunt to everyone else. He's probably just all round cunty.
He had a massive mausoleum in this churchyard, and it's become the centre of one of Edinburgh's most chilling legends, which I had never heard of previously, nor had you, Michelle, the Mackenzie poltergeist.
No.
One of the most famous incidents occurred. In fact, this almost seems to be the starting point for this. Christmas night, 1998. There's a homeless man who was looking for a warm place to escape the cold, and he broke into Mackenzie's big black mausoleum. And according to reports, the ground beneath the man suddenly gave way and plunged this poor homeless guy into a hidden chamber filled with centuries-old skeletons and rotting corpses. How'd you like that?
Jesus Christ. It's worse than waking up in the middle of the night and stepping on the insides of a dead rat. And having them squish between your toes.
Yeah.
I think it's actually
it's worse. Yeah. All those bods. Yes. So this poor guy, in a panic, he was clawing his way out and fled the kirkyard in terror. But it seems he may have disturbed something far worse than bones, Michelle. They believe it was the evil spirit of the malevolent George Mackenzie, Sir George, in fact. And the reason why they think this is because within weeks, accounts of strange and violent attacks began to surface. Visitors to the cemetery reported blackouts, unexplained bruising, deep scratches appearing on their skin, and all sorts. Others spoke of hot and cold spots in the area, being shoved by an invisible force, or having their hair yanked or limbs grabbed at by unseen hands. And this is what they were mentioning on that episode of Uncanny, because obviously in my previous story about the Yorkshire house, there was a physical ghost there as well.
Yes, dragging some lady up the stairs by her neck.
Pulling her hair and dragging her up by the neck, yes. One woman even claimed to have been thrown backwards at the kirkyard by an icy blast of air coming from George Mackenzie's mausoleum.
Oof.
Another young woman was apparently found unconscious near the mausoleum, and it appeared she'd been strangled. But when she came to, she didn't remember anything, which, of course, many people would put down to Mackenzie's volatile ghost.
Right.
So, yes, it sounds like he wasn't nice to ladies and his wife if he's strangling strangers, all these years later. The disturbances became so intense that Edinburgh City Council locked the cemetery gates, which they'd never done before, and declared the site off limits for public safety. But the horror continued, Michelle. If you look into the stories, which I have added links for you to put up on the Patreon, of the kirkyard and Sir George Mackenzie, there's a really unsettling image, which was apparently capturing the spirit of Mackenzie in the background. The photo is of spiritualist medium Colin Grant, who owned a clairvoyance shop in Edinburgh. And at the time the photo was being taken, Colin was attempting to investigate the paranormal activity at the site because he'd been told if he didn't do this exorcism, there was a good chance that more people were going to be hurt. And of course, they wanted those cemetery gates open again. So it was down to Colin to fix it. So on a cold November evening, there was Colin and two other people, a journalist and a photographer from a local newspaper who were there to document the exorcism. Colin confessed to the reporter that he was struggling with the exorcism ritual more than usual. So he gave up on trying to confront Mackenzie's ghost and then turned his attention instead to liberating all the trapped spirits of this approximate 200 Covenanters that were buried there. Remember all the people that Sir George Mackenzie had tortured,
thrown
starved,
into a mass
jailed,
grave.
and then thrown into a mass grave. Yeah. Colin was tired and said the exorcism would be the death of him. So Colin proceeds to do the business of the ritual. When it reached its climax at about 2 a.m, everyone in attendance began to get the heebie-jeebies, Michelle. Something was off. The photographer took that iconic final image of Colin where a mysterious dark figure appears over Colin's shoulder and appears to be peering out from a window of the locked and vacant church behind Colin in the shot. Now, if you look at this picture, which I have, it's very hard to see. It does look like somebody's in the window, but you can't tell. Is it shadows? God knows, right? But the photographer later told colleagues that this apparition was moving when she took the photo.
What?
Yeah. And after the flash subsided from her camera shot, 66-year-old Colin collapsed to the ground in a heap. The journalist hurried over to check on Colin, who was barely conscious and mumbling, "This is going to kill me, this is going to kill me." And a few days after his collapse, Colin, whilst giving his final reading of the day in his shop in Edinburgh, suddenly died.
Oh.
He had said to his client, "This will be my last reading as I've run out of good things to say."
Uh-huh.
And then whilst giving the reading, he just died.
Fucking hell.
And a lot of people put that down to Sir George Mackenzie.
Right.
His reach. Yeah.
Okay.
Trying to get rid of him. But Colin's widow, Audrey, later said Colin had a bad heart and had been on medication.
So maybe he had an inkling.
Maybe.
Something wasn't right.
Possibly. She also added that it was a lovely way for him to go, doing what he loved, and that it was quick.
Well, quick, yes, okay.
She doesn't have that kind of feeling that he was terrorized from a couple of days earlier when he was doing the exorcism.
Well, she sounds like a very sensible lady.
Well, she's lived with Colin for many, many years, I suppose. And she also said that he told her he felt, because he didn't know, he could see into other people's futures and do readings for other people, but he couldn't do it for himself. But he said he thought that he would be the first one to die out of the two of them. And another thing that he'd said to her, eerily, before his death was he didn't think he would see out the summer, which they laughed about. It was a joke.
Oh, that's sad.
Yeah. But to this day, eerie white figures have been spotted gliding near that mausoleum, and those brave enough to visit report sudden temperature drops, whispers in the dark, and the horrible feeling of being watched.
Yuck.
Some people believe Mackenzie haunts Greyfriars kirkyard as a tormented soul burdened by guilt by his brutal persecution of the Covenanters. But if that's true, why do so many people leave his resting place with scratches and bruises?
What?
He can't keep his hands to himself.
Even now?
Yeah, so if he's just tormented soul, why is he just lashing out at all these people, is what I'm saying.
Oh, he's just pissed off and angry. A bit like me.
Hands off, Mackenzie.
Grumpy old bastard.
Keep your hands to yourself. But what do you think about physical ghosts actually touching, pushing, bruising, cutting? Do you think it's mass hysteria or do you think it really happened?
Funny you should say that because my story deals exactly with those things. And I don't know, which is why probably I'm listening thinking this sounds very similar to what I'm going to talk to you about, in that there's physical evidence and no one has an explanation. Is it a hoax? Is it self-inflicted? Or is there a poltergeist, causing physical harm to people?
Yeah.
I don't know, Geordie. Do you know?
Well, we don't know, do we? That's the thing. I did feel when I was looking at this story that all of the reports were pushing for Colin to have died on the spot, to have been haunted and to be freaked out and falling to the ground saying, "This will be the death of me, this will be the death of me." When actually, I believe he may have been more of a jokey jokester. He obviously believes in spirits, paranormal, supernatural, because that's his living. He makes a living out of it. But he didn't die there, and we are led to believe that he did. But he died a couple of days later in his shop.
But this is it. It's about sensationalizing things.
Yeah.
And that's why I said the wife sounds like a sensible lady. She's trying to damage control the whole thing and just put it into a very normal context. She's normalizing his death rather than saying it's all paranormal, it's all, superstitious.
Exactly. In the article I read about, it was an Edinburgh Live article about his death, she never ever mentioned anything about what he'd gotten up to a few nights before at the behest of Edinburgh City Council, I think, with a client that time.
Well, this is the thing. Maybe their relationship was a little bit Mulder and Scully. You know, one was the skeptic, one was the believer, and she was maybe the skeptic and he was the believer, and she is like, you know, not giving airtime to those theories. I don't know.
Well, we have talked as well before about, do you remember my Indian psychic who was murdered on the job, killed by unseen forces?
You say that like it was your personal psychic.
He's not
he
mine.
was your mate. But yes, I do remember that story.
He wasn't my mate.
Terrifying. Wow. Well, I don't have answers. And you did such a thorough job on the story. I didn't even really have many questions because you kind of presented all the sides. Well done.
Thanks.
Hey, are you scared of the dark? How would you like it if we hit you up with hauntings and horror? Would you be too scared and scream it up the hoo-ha? And now we tell you all the supernatural stories of the world.
My story this week, well, you found it for me. And in fact, kudos to the Beacon twins, in particular, Jane, who gave us...
Because we had a flick, didn't we?
Well, you had a flick. You flicked. Flicked that bean of a book. And...
What?
The Chambers Dictionary of the Unexplained. And in fact, I mean, you did a flick, but you literally went basically to the very end.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You just went, what's on the back? Eleanore Zugan was on the back.
What's her name? Sorry?
Eleonore, but I'm going to call her Eleanor. Zugan. Zugan? Don't ask me. She's Romanian. I don't know how you would pronounce this, but for the purposes of this podcast, she's Eleanor Zugan.
Fine.
Eleanor Zugan. When Eleanor found a coin on the road when she was just 11 years old, of course she picked it up, right? It's 1925. She's in rural Romania in a tiny farming village called Talpa. And even though a friend she was with told her not to pick it up because it was, quote, the devil's money, Eleanor grabbed that coin, went to the shops, bought loads of lollies, and then refused to share them.
She's the devil herself by the sound of it. What a devilish child.
Look, she's 11 years old, and I have to say, this kid in some ways sounds a bit like me, because when I was a kid, I was always finding money on the ground. Always. I remember once I found $50 at the petrol station in a pile of autumn leaves that were on the side of the road section near the petrol pump.
Oh, my God.
I just looked. My eyes just saw $50.
Do you know that happened to me as well?
Really?
More recently with my youngest boy, we were at the train station very early in the morning and he needed to do a wee. So he did into this wasteland through a fence.
What, he just whipped it out and popped it through a fence?
Well, he was only little and I encouraged him to do that because otherwise it was a case
You
of...
did say recently and I thought you meant like last week or something.
He's not that old still. So he did this wee through the fence and I think he's not the only one to have thought to do that because I think maybe other revellers, because it smelt of wee, I think other revellers had done that as well and were so drunk that they pulled out a pile of cash and dropped it there because I found some.
Wow.
Crisp 20s. Yeah.
Amazing. So not pissy 20s, crisp.
They may have been pissy.
Lovely.
But I didn't care. Money's money.
Dirty money. Dirty
money.
Dirty money. What else do they call it? Dirty... What else do they call it?
Filthy lucre.
Filthy lucre. That's exactly what I was thinking of. Well done. Well, I had a thing. I always found money when I was a kid.
Oh.
It would be coins, notes, the lot. Unlike Eleanor, I never used to spend my money. I was a saver.
Oh.
Mum used to always say when I opened my purse, the moths flew out. I like to think I was just good with money and I knew that saving it for something I really wanted was better than just spending it on, lollies in the moment. I have to say I'm not like that anymore. I quite enjoy spending money now, but that feeling actually of holding back with money, it's always still with me.
Honey joys and saveloys, hands off the fairy bread, you naughty boys.
Eleanor, she found that money. She bought those lollies and then she didn't share them. And apparently her grandmother was furious with her for not sharing. Because, sharing is caring. And she said, this is what Grandma said to Eleanor. She told her she'd swallowed the devil with those lollies. Yeah. And now she would never be free of the devil.
Oh, no.
Which I have to say, that is a bit rough, Nana.
It's a lot for an 11-year-old.
To say that, because all she did, she's 11, she didn't share her sweets. Tone it down, Grandma. But that's what she said. And according to an article I found that went into this supernatural case in great detail, the next day while Eleanor was with her grandmother and some other kids from the village, out of nowhere, stones began to fly against the house and smash the windows.
Oh, my God.
Random, right? They were not thrown, they were just flying. Not only that, whenever Eleanor was around, small objects that were around and near her began to just fly, move of their own accord. This went on for 3 consecutive days, which freaked her family out to the point where they put Eleanor in a monastery to have her exorcised.
Oh, no. She's still 11?
She's 11!
Oh.
This exorcism didn't work. Things kept moving and flying around whenever Eleanor was in the vicinity. And when the monastery didn't work, her parents sent her to the local mental asylum for observation.
Oh.
Again,
no.
This girl's 11. And to me, that sounds really fucking terrible.
In 20s era Romania.
1925. Yes. Romania. Rural.
I've just got a feeling it would be quite rough.
Rural.
Rural.
There's a freaking mental asylum, so I don't know what's going on there. But anyway, a local newspaper got wind of what was happening with Eleanor, and on April 18, 1925, they published an article about her and all the strange shit that seemed to follow her around. And what I mean by that is there were rapping sounds. So, rapping sounds.
Right.
Objects moving on their own, sometimes between rooms. And apports, A-P-P-O-R-T-S.
What's that? Doors? Something to do with doors?
They're small objects that appear and disappear without any clear cause.
Oh. So when you said between rooms as well, are we talking when it goes through the walls or through the ceilings?
I don't know if it goes through walls and ceilings, but probably because this is obviously what is happening with these apports. And for anyone who has listened to the Patreon, Pinball Jeff talks a little bit about this in a way.
Yeah.
So
yes.
Pin that, sign up.
Yeah, pinball it.
Pinball that. On top of all of this, Eleanor had bite marks and welts and abrasions showing up on her body out of nowhere. And she was doing automatic writing.
Oh, God. Possessed.
Somehow this German spiritualist organisation also got hold of this story and sent a guy called Fritz Grunwald to Romania to check things out. And Fritz was an engineer and a parapsychologist. Although not exactly a spiritualist himself, he was definitely into the paranormal. When he got to Talpa to investigate, he thankfully managed to get Eleanor out of the asylum and, okay, fair enough, back into the monastery. But he did this so he could observe her more closely. Fritz Grunwald wrote a brief statement saying that he genuinely believed that what was happening to Eleanor really, truly was something paranormal. But before he could finish his full report, dude died of a heart attack.
Oh, very Colin Grant.
Yes. Was it connected? Was it not? No one's saying.
Was it just unfortunate coincidence?
Exactly. So fast forward to 1926 when Eleanor was summoned to Vienna to be observed by and live with a woman called Countess Zoe Wasilko von Serecki.
How did that come about?
Hold your horses, Nelly. She was a Romanian-speaking Austrian aristocrat who belonged to a family that had owned the land where Eleanor's family had lived before the breakup of the Austro-Hungarian Empire in 1918. So sort of 8 years earlier, this all happened. So there was a connection between the two families. When Countess Zoe was 28, she had apparently studied parapsychology, which I didn't even know that was a thing back in 1918 in Austria. And as part of her studies, she'd sat with mediums for more than 6 years to observe them. And she apparently was quite well known for exposing frauds and fake mediums. So I guess she knew her shit. And she was wealthy, so she had the time and the means to do this.
And the interest.
Now, Countess Zoe apparently first met Eleanor in September 1925 and genuinely believed that what was happening to Eleanor was the real deal. So when she shipped Eleanor off to Vienna, it did not take long for Countess Zoe to start studying Eleanor to see if she could uncover what was going on from a paranormal perspective. And every time something weird happened that was unexplainable and not necessarily to Eleanor, but remember, this shit was happening when Eleanor was in the room. Things were flying, banging was happening.
Like the Enfield poltergeist.
Exactly. So Countess Zoe would log everything in a notebook. And a year later, an Austrian parapsychologist called Peter Malax independently went through that notebook and he tallied up 3,060 incidents, of which 884 of those incidents were corroborated by other people who'd observed that same incident. Right. So it wasn't just Countess Zoe and Eleanor in a room. There were 884 incidents where other people were in the room and saw the same shit happening.
And did those people have cause to reject the claims of what they saw? Did they think, oh, no, they were throwing their voices? Like with the Enfield poltergeist, some people felt that the girls were bunging on the voice of the old man, whose name I can't remember. I think it was Fred.
Well, no, this group...
Sausages.
Oh, yeah. The group that were around Eleanor included maids, the governess, Countess Zoe's parents, and also a lot of scientists who were invited to observe what was happening. So Eleanor was a bit of a lab rat, actually.
Right.
And one of these people was actually a British paranormal investigator called Harry Price.
I know the name.
He's been around. He's done things in that era with a lot of paranormal and parapsychological things. He observed Eleanor in Vienna, and it was on 3 separate days in April 1926. He then took Eleanor to London and then observed her in September of that year in his lab there. It was actually Harry Price who published detailed reports in both British and American parapsychological journals and even referenced the case in what became a best-selling book at the time, which, it was his work that helped make Eleanor's story famous worldwide. Then, on February 14 in 1927, when Eleanor was 13, she got her first period. But unlike Carrie, who started her period, which then triggered telekinesis.
Yes.
And for anyone who doesn't know why I'm bringing up Carrie, go back a few episodes and listen to the Stephen King episode. So unlike Carrie, when Eleanor got her rags, the strange phenomena actually started to fade away. And the last recorded incident of this weird kind of activity going on around Eleanor was June 17. It just stopped. And by the following March, she was sent back to Romania by Countess Zoe from Vienna.
Amazing.
What was really going on with this girl from Romania?
What was going on, and why was it her period coming and the change of becoming a woman, if you like, or the hormonal changes that caused it to stop rather than escalate?
Exactly.
And Harry Price, it's all coming back to me now, and I've just checked. He was one of the ghost hunters exploring the possibility of Jeff the talking mongoose in one of our episodes that we've done previously. Yes.
Not Pinball Jeff, but Jeff the talking
mongoose.
Oh, pin that, guys. If you haven't heard that episode, go back.
Go back and listen.
And if you're on the Patreon, I'll put a link to that. Well, the speculation was that there was, a naughty poltergeist attached to Eleanor.
It may have come from her. This is what I'm thinking. Sorry to interrupt you. I feel like the fact that she picked up the devil's money, the fact that she swallowed the sweeties in an act of selfishness and she swallowed the devil.
Yeah.
In her mind, this stuff is happening. And I often wonder if she was the cause of it psychically.
Maybe.
If she managed to manifest these things. Because I do believe the brain is capable of more than we can ever imagine.
Well, like we talked about in a previous episode, apparently research has suggested, hasn't been confirmed.
There's more to the brain.
Well, that
yes.
all of us have these super high levels of psychic
right.
ability. It's just that it's turned off.
You said.
It's not that we have to train ourselves to learn it. We have it. We've just switched it off. So if what you're saying is true about her, then she switched it on somehow, potentially. And that definitely could be a theory. I mean, all we know is that Countess Zoe was intrigued by Eleanor and had all this testing done. And, you know, apparently Eleanor was healthy. She did have skin sensitivity. She was, by all accounts, a smart but fairly normal kid. And a bit stubborn. She was occasionally sulky, a bit moody. She was suspicious of people.
A bit devilish.
A bit devilish, bit selfish, ate all those sweeties. But there was no reason really why all these strange things were happening. According to an article I read, these things were real. So there were rapping sounds. And these rapping sounds would usually come from furniture like the table or bed, or something close to her. And Harry Price, who investigated, said the rapping was similar to what he'd heard when he'd been with other mediums. But he pointed out that whenever the rapping was heard, unlike with mediums, no one was trying to contact whatever entity was supposedly making those rapping sounds.
Right.
So they were interested in studying Eleanor, not the poltergeist, if you see what I mean.
Yes, yes.
And then there were those moving objects and apports. Like I said, small items that would appear and disappear for no obvious reason.
Those things freak me out, Michelle.
Yes.
I cannot imagine being faced with that because, you know, as I told Jeff, I have a candle that went missing in my house. There's no evidence of it burning down.
No.
There's no evidence of it anywhere in the house. And other things, you know, that go missing for years, months, years. And Jeff experienced it too, not the talking mongoose, but Pinball Jeff, where something he was using disappeared within moments and was found years later deep inside
A closet.
his closet. Exactly.
Look, I often think, if I picture what's in front of me right now, and I pretend that there's a zip in midair, and I open
A zip?
that zip, I feel like taking that candle, your pink candle that went missing, and throwing it through that zip, and it's just gone. And then it's zipped up and it's back to reality.
What's on the other side?
Another reality, another universe.
Okay.
What else? Where else are these apports coming from? I can't explain it in any way, and that's just my theory. I don't know if that's a real thing.
Well, another theory that came up in the Uncanny episodes that I watched was, because, you know, Kieran, the debunker, he likes to come in with all the, well, it could be this and it could be that. And to be honest, Kieran, you were reaching in most of those episodes, but he did mention somebody living in, he called it something and I can't remember the word for it now. We've done many stories about it. Somebody living in your crawl space, somebody living in your roof.
Fucking happens.
It happens. We know about this, Michelle. We've done many stories on it.
Bad Ronald. Yes. Look, that can also happen. However, there was a German philosophy professor called Johannes Maria Verweyen who was visiting the Countess and Eleanor. He saw this shit happen quite a few times. He described this one incident of how books on a shelf, all lined up neatly, would sometimes move forward as if an invisible hand was pushing them, especially the smaller books. And he witnessed this multiple times and was convinced there was no trickery involved. Now, apparently some of the notes written by Fritz Grunwald, who was that German spiritualist, before he died, some of his notes were published posthumously. And these included witness statements, like one from a local schoolmaster who described an event where he was watching a water jug that was sitting on a big stool under a window, leaning at an angle. The jug was full of water, and after about 5 minutes, he saw the jug slowly rise about 1/2 metre, lifting itself up from its leaning position.
Oh my God.
Then it slanted down and settled upright at the other end of the stool, and not a single drop of water was spilled. And this is while Eleanor was around.
That is insane. If you were to witness this, though, you would think that you were going crazy.
Well, everyone in the room saw it happen. So it was impossible for anyone to have moved that jug
Eerie.
by hand, by themselves. Many people saw this happen. Now, whether this was because Eleanor was in the room or if she was somehow causing it to happen, I don't know. But Harry Price, while observing Eleanor, with Countess Zoe, wrote about a whole series of strange occurrences. Like I said, small items disappear and then mysteriously reappear. And whenever this happened, when something disappeared, the whole place was searched, top to bottom. And Eleanor was searched too, and nothing was found. Harry Price then also described this incident with a letter opener. He was sitting with his back to it when suddenly it shot across the room from behind him and landed against the door.
Dangerous.
Yes. He called it a letter knife.
A mini sword.
But when he turned around to check, it was gone. Nothing was there.
Oh.
And he was sure Eleanor did not throw it because both her hands were occupied, don't know what doing. But she was also being watched by both Harry and Countess Zoe at the time.
People will have eyes on that girl.
Yep. And the letter opener had just flown through the air and then disappeared into thin air.
Into that zip.
Like my zip
Yeah.
theory. Then that same day, Harry said he saw a sudden flash right in front of him just as something landed on a low bookcase. So he went to check out what was going on and discovered that a small mirror had somehow been thrown over the partition from the bedroom side. Mm-hmm. And this mirror had normally sat on a table near the Countess's bed. And he was certain that no one in the room could have thrown it. And he even searched the bedroom to see where it had come from and if there was anything unusual, but he didn't find anything. And he went through all the possible explanations. You know, were there wires? Were there threads? Were there springs that could have somehow launched that mirror? Were there rubber bands? Maybe compressed air? There was nothing that could have launched that mirror and made it move like that. A similar thing happened with a toy dog. It got tossed around the room, even though no one was there at the time.
It's a toy.
Yeah, it's a toy dog.
Sorry. I had a moment of horror.
A cloth dog they called it. And look, Harry Price noted that these bizarre events often happened when Eleanor was in the room or next door, and they were more intense when she was hungry or angry.
Right.
Things got more active when she was hungry, but nothing ever happened when she was asleep. And there's an incident that the German spiritualist, back to Fritz Grunwald, reported. He says around 10:55 in the morning, Eleanor was sitting completely still right in front of him and he was watching her. Then, out of nowhere, something seemed to appear from behind her about 80 centimetres above the table, roughly 20 centimetres from her head, and it floated off to her left, which was Fritz's right, and then dropped to the floor, landing about a metre away from her. Turns out it was a small silver chain with a blue stone that was apparently a gift from someone called Klein. I don't know who that was, but Eleanor had given it to the cook in the house. So she kind of regifted that necklace.
Right.
So logically, this must have come from the kitchen. It definitely didn't come from Eleanor. And Fritz said it was broad daylight and Eleanor had been sitting on the veranda being watched the whole time.
Wow.
Just this necklace out of nowhere. Yep.
That's just, I just would hate to see that. A floating thing like the Ghost and Mrs. Muir. Do you remember that? Where
Yes,
things
of
would float around
course.
like they were on fishing wire.
I actually liked that.
Yeah.
That was before green screen. But Harry also wrote about things, again, like other toys and jewellery, which would suddenly show up way, way, way far away from where they originally were placed. And he described how things would be put in one room only to reappear minutes later in another room, dropping into the middle of a room as if from thin air. Even locked doors didn't stop these apports. Countess Zoe described it this way. Objects would vanish, then suddenly crash to the ground somewhere else, often near Eleanor's head, with no sign of how they got there, no visible path. I mean, just bam, they were just there. And in a later account, Countess Zoe shared a bizarre moment involving this whole apport phenomena. She said that she'd walked into her room and was standing by the window looking outside when she noticed a shadow drifting across and then slowly slipping through the window, not moving in a straight line, but gliding in. And then she heard a solid thud behind her. And when she turned around, she saw a small metal snuff box sitting on her bed that had never been there before. And inside were dominoes, but one of the dominoes had spilled out of the box and onto the bed. So what she's saying is that shadow brought
Yes.
in this snuff box.
That's horrifying.
Yep. So basically, when Eleanor was around, strange shit happened not just to Eleanor, but to everyone around her. She said to describe this shadowy thing, she called it a hole in the world.
Oh.
Yes. She said that was the best way she could explain it. And she said it didn't look like any normal object in motion. It was more like a shadow that showed up before the actual object appeared.
So that's almost like your zip, Michelle.
Kind of. And then when the object finally did drop, the force of the fall matched the height at which it became visible.
Oh, right.
So you, first of all, you see the shadow, then she would see something in its hand, and it would drop from that height. And that's the kind of force with which... So if it was only dropping a short distance, there wouldn't be
I
that
don't
much of
like
a thud.
it.
I know. And she said it's as if that's the exact moment the object snaps back into our reality and starts following the normal rules of physics again.
Right. I wonder what scientists would make of this. I mean, there were scientists in the room,
Yes,
but they were from 1925.
exactly. And look, I have got a couple of bits from scientists debunking this, but there were more weird things, especially involving another coin. There was this one time where a guest had stayed with Countess Zoe and had planned to leave a tip, a silver coin, but he popped it back into his pocket. He didn't leave it there because he didn't see the person to give it to. And instead he thought, well, I'll pay for my bus fare with that silver coin. Reached into his pocket. It was gone.
It's all about the money. I wonder if that was the original coin that she found.
Well, I don't know. But 10 minutes after this guy had left,
Yeah.
Eleanor and the Countess were sitting together when out of nowhere, a silver shilling suddenly dropped right in front of them.
Oh,
So they didn't connect the dots between that and what it
didn't know.
and the friend, until a few days later.
Yeah.
Like I said, there were also things that happened to Eleanor's body. She started getting punctures and scratches on her skin with no clear cause.
You did say she had sensitive skin, though.
Yes, but there were weird things, like Countess Zoe wrote that she had a box of sewing needles that were missing from her workbox, but they would end up somehow in Eleanor's hands and even her face.
What?
And no one could see how they happened or how they got there.
Why would she do that to herself?
I know. And then there were things like Eleanor would suddenly start screaming and point to a spot on her arm or her chest. And when the Countess would check to see what was going on, they'd see something that looked like a bite mark.
Oh, no.
But then, while they were watching, that mark would change.
What?
It would turn red, then white, and then completely disappear.
Oh, no.
Harry Price said, technically, she could have made those bite marks herself, but he said she would have had to bite herself through her clothes. And how can you bite your chest? I can't bite my bloody chest.
No.
And that there would have been fabric damage, saliva stains. There was none.
Wow.
It's very, very strange. But there was one time there was a bite mark on Eleanor's skin that was wet. And she said she believed that the moisture on her skin was Dracu's saliva. Dracula.
Oh.
So this whole thing with the Dracula coin right from the beginning.
And the shadow.
Medical experts did test this saliva and they found that the microorganisms in the fluid were different from her own saliva. But then they were saying, was it really even saliva at all? There was another thing that happened. There was a documentary apparently filmed about Eleanor in Munich that did capture some of this stuff on camera. And it showed that even a light touch from someone else could cause visible abrasions or welts to suddenly appear on Eleanor's skin. And you had mentioned...
That is how sensitive.
Yes,
Yep.
exactly. And that, strange scratches and bite marks did just show up on her body. And we did talk about this automatic writing, and apparently she said the messages being channeled through Eleanor's hands were coming from Dracu, and that sometimes the messages promised that something strange would happen on a specific day, and it did sometimes, but not all times. Sometimes the prediction came true, sometimes not. So the Countess believed that all the strange psychokinetic stuff, so objects moving, things coming out of nowhere, actually came from deep-rooted guilt. A little bit like what you were saying about the sweeties. And she believed that Eleanor was punishing herself, possibly because her grandmother said, you're going to be possessed by the devil for not sharing.
She planted a seed in her mind, and it's subconscious.
Yeah.
She doesn't know she's doing these things.
No, and that the idea really did seem to stick.
Yeah.
And that even though the Countess was not trained in psychoanalysis, she did do 60 homemade sessions with Eleanor between May and August in 1926. An Austrian parapsychologist, Peter Mulak, who we talked about earlier, later said these sessions were amateurish, but he did say they could have had a real impact and could have been the reason why the activity started moving from objects to herself,
right,
and the bite marks and the physical stuff. He actually summed up a few different theories that people had come up with to explain what was going on with Eleanor. And a lot of these ideas did try to connect her experiences to the psychological or kind of physical things that were going on. The Countess had apparently made a graph tracking how the phenomena that occurred during March 1926 clearly showed a rise and fall in activity. And she thought there was a link to Eleanor's cycle.
Yeah.
But then it didn't sort of track because the charts didn't always support that theory. And then all that stuff stopped after she had her period.
Yeah. So they attempted to make a link there, but it didn't quite run its course, I suppose.
And then they thought, is there something to do with moon phases? But again...
Which is again linked to the cycle.
Yeah, it didn't support that.
Right.
And then Peter Muller, he decided to see whether the phenomena that was going on lined up with spikes in geomagnetic activity or with specific times related to the Earth's rotation, apparently known as local sidereal time. But he didn't find any correlations with that either. Some researchers said that Eleanor would try to fake the phenomena when she wasn't being closely watched, but the Countess poo-pooed that and said she thought it was genuinely unexplainable.
Again, like the Enfield's poltergeist, this was going on. Maurice Grosse absolutely believed that the children were being terrorised, but others thought that they were just enjoying the attention.
Exactly. And then there's a guy, Max Dessoir, who was a German philosopher and parapsychologist turned skeptic, who said that basically Eleanor was making all the marks on herself with her fingernails or the edge of a ring that she would wear. The thing is, though, that Peter Mullak pointed out that the Countess specifically always kept Eleanor's nails short. Eleanor wasn't always wearing the ring, and that when the phenomena was captured for that film that was filmed in Munich, Eleanor wasn't wearing the ring, but these bites were appearing.
Right.
And scratches.
Ah.
So, like I said, it all died down after Eleanor got her first period, and so did the attention. She was sent back to Romania.
Pre-Bad Penny.
Yep. When she was a little older, Eleanor went back to Vienna to train as a hairdresser and manicurist. She married. She didn't have any children. She was later widowed. But she did write to the Countess when she was in her 50s, saying that the strange phenomena had started up again.
Oh.
The Countess
Perimenopause.
thought that maybe it was happening and connected to menopause, but it was just a guess. And that is the strange story of Eleanor, what did I want to call her? Zugan.
Oh, wow. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you to the Chambers Dictionary of the Unexplained for that gem. And thank you to the Beacon Twins for giving us the gift that keeps giving, the guide to the mysterious, the paranormal, and the supernatural.
And do you know what? It's a bit of light relief after last week's fucking shocker of a story.
Oh, that was rough,
It was
Michelle. And I
rough.
think I got the fear because when I tried to look up that story just to see where it came from, nowhere did it go into as much detail as you did.
I've got all the horrific links.
But then you sent me the story where you got it.
And I've got Court Report TV, which goes into some bits.
If it's in the public domain, then we are allowed to say it. But if we're ever not sure, then apparently, allegedly, those words, allegedly is the one that helps you out of trouble. They were talking about the rose petal murder from last week where Michelle told us some horrific things. And actually in that independent news source that you sent me, Michelle, the comments section was wild. It even hinted at more awful things involving more people, including allegedly the sister and allegedly the sheriff in charge of the original murder case, covering things up because they're all a part of some alleged massive paedophile ring. And there weren't thousands of pictures on these key drives and whatnot of both the victim and the victim's fiance who was arrested, but millions.
Oh my God.
And of course there was also a cocaine thing going on, because you mentioned in your story a bag of
white powder.
and you never brought it up again, but allegedly the sister is running the drugs as well. That house is a house of horrors.
Yeah.
Allegedly.
I think there's a lot more to that case. I couldn't go into too much.
And in the comments section, people who seem to know are hinting at other people being involved in the Rose Petal murder.
He's gone to jail. And like I said,
Yeah.
there's a link to the court TV where he confesses to it. It was a weird confession. So maybe there's something in that. I'll have to read those comments. But yes, this case is wild. And honestly, only dip a toe if you've got an iron gut,
Yeah,
because
it's a bit
it's
sickening.
a grim story.
But this is where you come, people, for all your true crime, real life and supernatural stories.
And come back next week, because right now we've only got 3 things left to say.
Wherever you are,
Whatever you do,
just keep
eavesdropping.
eavesdropping.
Eavesdropping, eavesdropping, dropping, eavesdropping, dropping, eavesdropping, eavesdropping,
Dropping, dropping.
eavesdropping, eavesdropping.